Hi, everyone. My name is Devin Watley. Welcome to another episode of the On the Record podcast. I'm joined by NBC Bay Area reporter Jocelyn Moran. Jocelyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for thinking of me to bring me on.
Yeah, for sure. And you and I both know each other from our brief time together with the DA, but obviously, your career spans way more than that, and we'll get more into that later in the moment. But for you working at NBC Bay Area, I mean, Bay Area is home for you, right? So you're making this move to a bigger market, and you've been doing a lot of different things there. What was it like for you to be able to just simply, come back home and work in a market that you're comfortable in and that you know a lot about?
Yeah, no, I got to the Bay Area about 2.5 years ago. It definitely was something I think a lot of people, at least I hope to one day accomplish. And so when the opportunity came to come back to the Bay Area, I was in Fresno previously. And so the opportunity came up, and I got here about 2.5 years ago. Recently moved to NBC Bay Area about 5 months ago. And so it's been great. I mean, when you're able to come home and report in some of the communities that you grew up in, I think that is something very, very unique and special. And so I'm definitely grateful for that. So it's been 2.5 years, and I'm still I'm very, very thankful, very grateful. And I remind myself of that every day.
Do you feel like working in a market that you're familiar with, and I feel like this also kind of applies to producers too, like you kind of feel like you have a better feel and understanding for what goes on, right? And do you feel like that kind of makes you better as a reporter in as a whole?
You know what? What's so interesting is the Bay Area is so big, right? And I grew up in, like, when I tell people, I'm like, are you from the Bay Area? I'm like, yeah, I'm from the Bay Area, of course. But I'm also, I grew up kind of in like this bubble. I didn't leave from this area specifically. I grew up along the peninsula. And so I didn't leave that area very often. And I think coming back here and reporting, I'm learning so much still, because the Bay Area is so big. Whether you're reporting in San Francisco, San Jose, the peninsula, the East Bay, the North Bay, there's so many areas and there's so many communities that make up these areas. And so I feel like I am learning every single day. Of course, there are, when you come back here, I think when you're reporting in a new market, you have to learn the cities, you have to learn the areas. And so I think, geographically knowing where things were, yes, that was like a huge advantage for me. And obviously growing up in the community that I did, I think you're more familiar where you're at. You're more familiar with some of the issues that are very prominent in some of these areas. So I think, yeah, that helped, but also the Bay Area is so big. And so I feel like I'm still learning every day.
Yeah, for sure. I always tell people, like, when me being a native, since I'm born and raised in San Diego, it's like, it's almost funny because I grew up watching NBC7 and I grew up watching all these anchors and things like that. And so being able to kind of work with them in this capacity that I'm in now, it's almost kind of like, I don't want to say advantageous to me, because obviously, like you said, there's a lot of things that we're still learning, but I feel like, at least for me, I get a better knowledge of what's going on because I already know what I already know those communities. Like, I've lived there, I've been through that. So I don't know if you get the same feeling in that sense too, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think what I try to keep up a lot, whether it be on social media or just through conversations with some of the people that I grew up with, because I mean, I'm sure there's so many issues right now that the Bay Area is facing. And so it's been interesting to see, when you're growing up, were these some of the issues that our communities were facing when I was growing up? Has this changed? I think that your perspective of growing up wherever you did grow up and being able to report on that, I think that you bring a unique perspective, because you can say, hold on, was this something that I saw growing up? Has this changed? Is this still an issue that the certain area, the Bay Area in this case, is facing? Or is this something that is kind of evolving and changing? I think that in that way, you do bring that unique perspective.
And, knowing that you work there as a reporter, what's a typical day like for you over there? Take me through like what you start in, how you finish. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so when I first got to the Bay Area, I was, you work in news, so I'm sure you know that like there are going to be days that maybe sometimes there's more consistency, and then there are days where or there are weeks where you're not consistent at all. But when I moved to the Bay Area, I was working the morning shift, and I had never worked the morning shift at all. So I was waking up at 2 a.m. and getting off at like 12:30. And that was so, interesting to me because that really messed with my routine. And now I work night side. And so it's like complete opposite schedule. I think when you work in news, you have to get used to knowing that, your schedule may change. There may be weeks where it's not always consistent, but with my schedule now, I have my mornings off, which is nice. I think I feel like I can, it's been interesting for the last couple of months trying to figure out a good routine. I think something that's really important for me, and I think it's important just in general when you do work in news, is trying to disconnect a little bit and really focus on some things that you do on the outside, whether that is working out, whether that's reading, whether that's going on a walk, whatever it is that you enjoy doing outside of work. I think that's really important. And so that's what I try to focus my mornings on. Of course, when during the week, when you are working, you're also having to be very conscious as far as like having a good conscience of what's going on during the morning with news or whatever. I feel like I used the wrong word there, but just being familiar with what's going on just during the day, because a lot of people are working in the hours that I'm not working. And so I am trying to keep up with news. But I'm also trying to find good ways to also disconnect. So I think it's finding a good balance. But as far as the work day, I'm always trying to find pitches before I go into the workday, trying to find some unique stories. But I'm sure, like, there's not always a good consistency sometimes when you work in news.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the beautiful thing about it, right? Is never, you're never getting the same day today and tomorrow and yesterday. Like every day is always different. That's what I kind of like about it, is just the spontaneity of it all. But with you working overnights, since you mentioned that, I worked overnights for like, I think 3 months or 4 months.
So you were working like that, like 11 p.m. to the morning
11
shift?
p.m. to 7 a.m.
Yeah, that's rough. That is rough. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When did you sleep?
Oh, I took 2 naps. I don't know if you were the same sort of way, but I was more in that mind of like, I couldn't sleep 8 hours from like, 3 p.m. till whatever. I just more like took 2 4-hour naps or 3-hour naps. Yeah. And then made that way. But was it harder for you to kind of adjust to that overnight shift when you first started?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I was on a good day, you could go to sleep at like 7, 8 p.m. and then wake up at 2 a.m. That was like a good day, and I hardly had those days. So I would end up going to sleep at like 9, 10, and then that maybe averaging 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and then coming home and taking like a 2-hour nap, sometimes 3 hours. So it just depended. What's been super interesting now is with this shift change, I feel like I'm getting tired at like 7, 8 p.m. When I'm working. So I'll have to have a cup of coffee at 7, 8 p.m. sometimes, because I feel like my body and my brain is still adjusting, because I did do mornings for quite a while and now doing opposite shifts. But no, that morning and overnight shift can be rough, but it also, I think it allows you to get some things done. After, if you're able to have a good sleep schedule, when you're going to be napping, when you're going to be sleeping, you're able to wake up and get stuff done. You can really get some stuff done in those hours when you are off.
Yeah, and do you feel like there's any like advantages now that you're in a night side shift compared to when you first started?
Ooh, I would say with like the morning shift, I was. When I'd get off, I think I was doing more things with like socially with friends, catching up with people I hadn't caught up with. Now with this shift change, nobody's off when I'm off. There aren't a lot of people who are off when I'm off. And so I think I've had to focus a lot more on things that I need to get done. whether that be appointments, whether that be on things that I'm working on the side, whether that be things for myself. And so that's been the good part. It's been an adjustment though, because now my weekends are more focused toward who haven't I seen during the week? Who do I need to catch up with? Who have I not seen in a few months by now? And so that's what my weekends are focused on. And now during the week, during the mornings, I feel like I'm doing a lot more that's focused on myself. And so that's been the biggest adjustment, I think, with the schedule. And I don't have kids, so I don't have to, I think it's a different, when you do have a family and you're working in news, I think your priorities obviously shift. But for me right now, it's a lot of focusing on myself and things I need to get done in the mornings.
Yeah, I always say like working in news, I feel like is one of the hardest adjustments on not just physically, but mentally, because it's like, you're working not only different hours, but then you're trying to balance all these different things going on in your life. With all these hours that maybe 1 week you're working the morning, for a couple of days and you're switching to turn around and do a night side. At least for me, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like the hours can be one of the hardest things to adjust to, especially when you're a young journalist, right out of college, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I was right out of college. I actually came back to be a PA after a few months after I graduated. I was a production assistant in NBC Bay Area, where I am now. And so I was there for a couple of months, and then I got my first reporting job in Fresno. And those hours were interesting because I was working the, I guess you say typical 9 to 6 job. But in news, sometimes you are covering certain stories where you have to stay longer. And so there were days where I wasn't getting home until like 8 p.m. And so I think when you do work that regular shift, sometimes you also understand that you may be working some more hours. So that was when I first got out of college. And then coming back to the Bay Area, those are the 2 shifts that I've worked, has been the mornings and now the night side shift. So it's like completely opposites schedules. But I think I think finding a good balance is always really important, whatever shift you're working is. If you know the days that you're going to need to focus on yourself, if you know the days you're going to have to be working out, that's important. If you know the days that, I haven't seen this person in a while and I really want to see this person, let's see if I can set something up that morning or that weekend. I think that's extremely important too, because at least for me, I've really tried to get better at balancing that. Work is work, and I want to make sure I'm putting 100% of me into work and getting some of the stories, really investing my time in those stories because I care about those stories and getting that done. And then at the same time, also understanding that I need a break or I need to find other things that separate myself from work. I think that's really important because at the end of the day, if I'm doing that, that's going to help me be more successful at work.
Do you feel like that's an important thing to prioritize, that work-life balance? Because I feel like a lot of journalists in college may be thinking like, I need to work really hard to try and impress and kind of live up to the, I don't want to say expectations and pressure, but you almost have that because you're coming into a job right out of college or that sort of thing.
Right.
How important is it to prioritize that work-life balance?
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important. And you're right. I think coming out of college, that wasn't always something that I was prioritizing because I was in that mentality of, oh my gosh, I need to get this done. Oh my gosh, I need to be building up my reel. And I honestly couldn't stress the importance of that, like even more. You have to be so passionate about this job. This job is not an easy job by any means in whatever position you're in. And so I think the way for me that I've been able to keep that passion, the way that I've been able to just give the best job that I can do every shift with the story is if I am keeping that balance, because I'm also understanding that I'm taking care of my mental health. I'm also understanding that I'm taking care of my physical health outside of work. That's going to make me better at work. because it hasn't always been that way, and I still struggle with it to this day. If there are days where I'm like, whoa, I'm not okay, I don't feel my best physically, I don't feel my best mentally, then that's going to affect me at work. And so I think that balance is so, so important. And even when you're just starting out, that is, for me, and I realize that is how you're going to keep your passion for the job, is if you're taking care, for me, is if I'm taking care of myself outside of work, that's going to make me better at work. I can't stress for me how important that has been for me. And what's interesting is I got into the industry like out of college. I graduated May 2019. By March 2020, the pandemic hit, and I had just gotten my first reporting job a few months before that. And that was hard. This was trying to figure out how to balance work life, because so much of work was COVID. You were covering the pandemic. That was what I was doing. And sometimes I was working from home. And then now you're having to also figure out how to take care of yourself in a pandemic. That was probably the area where it was the most difficult. But I think that was also the area where I learned just how important that really is.
Yeah. And in that, you mentioned covering during a pandemic and that happening after you got a job out of college. I can't imagine how hard that must have been, because it's like, you get, you graduate college and, you get this job and you're thinking great. And then all of a sudden this whole thing hits. What was kind of going through your mind at that moment, like trying to navigate that job?
Yeah, no, I think you obviously saw when there were people when we were going through the pandemic. I think it created a lot of anxiety, and it created a lot of anxiety for me. It was just aside of knowing that I was reporting on it, I think just living, like a lot of people, they created a lot of anxiety for you and your family. And so I think what helped me was being able to ask a lot of these questions when we didn't know so much about the pandemic. Was, okay, I'm asking questions. I had the ability to ask these questions to doctors who know about this, who are learning about this, who can tell me about this, and I'm able to tell other people about it. That helped so much. Because obviously when we first were in the pandemic, we had so many questions. And so having the ability to ask doctors questions and then write stories about it, I think that was such a privilege during the pandemic for me. And it helped a lot me. And I was also hoping it was helping other people. And so in that way, I think working helped me when it came to just certain anxieties that came with the pandemic, because I was educating myself. I was able to like I said, ask questions and then hopefully give answers to other people who had similar questions. And so in that way, it was helpful. Aside from that, when you were working in it, I was working and then coming home, and I wasn't really leaving the house. And that was really hard, because it was very hard to separate work and life. And I think it was super hard for everybody, regardless, because we were all inside for the most part. And I think the hardest part for me was I wasn't really coming home and seeing family. I was in a pandemic essentially by myself for the first part of it. Then I had a roommate who was actually working with me, and that helped a ton. But essentially, I was in a pandemic. I didn't have my family. I wasn't seeing my family. And that was very, very, very hard, because you are coming out of college. You are, you're entering this industry, and then a pandemic hits, and also you don't have your family with you. That can be really, really, really hard.
Yeah, I can imagine, at least for me, like I was, in school when this was going on. And then,
right. So what year were you when that happened? I
graduated a year early. I graduated in 2021. But I was a sophomore, I think, before COVID hit. Like I remember I was in the DA and we were having meetings and we were getting ready to go to the tournament because the basketball team was getting set to play.
Oh my gosh. And they were so good that year.
Yeah,
They were like really, really good that year. Yeah.
So we were getting set to go to the tournament, and we had all these plans made and everything like that. And then all of a sudden, this hits, and we were thinking like, oh, this is only going to happen for like a week or whatever, and then all of a sudden everything just started cascading. And it was crazy because like a lot of people, at least for in my class, like they had a lot of doubts about if they were going to get jobs and things like that. And just the whole market just really scoped things out. But, that was, at least for me, I don't know how you felt during that time, but it was kind of, like you said, a lot of anxiety, and it was really hard to deal with, at least for people in college, because it's like a lot of us young journalists just didn't really know what to do in terms of the scope of the future at that moment.
Yeah, no. And I kept telling myself that I was like, when I was thinking people, right, like I got to go through the 4 years of college, and have that experience. I was like, oh, there's, because you graduated in 2021. So as a sophomore, did you lose like a year and a half? Were you not on campus?
Yeah, I was not on campus for a whole year, I think.
Yeah.
At least if I remember.
That's so hard too, because I think even, being part of the Daily Aztec there, like you had that community there, and you were able to grow your skills even at that time. And then also just being around people who were, in a sense, chasing some of the same goals was so important for me. And so that was something I thought about. I was like, I think you could talk a little bit more on that, is just because getting a job out of college, it was already hard given that it wasn't a pandemic. And like you said, just, I can't imagine what that was like for people who were graduating college.
Oh yeah. I mean, for me, I always say I got kind of lucky because one of my professors at SDSU, he knew the news director for NBC7, and my professor saw my talent in writing. He's like, oh, they might have a job open. So then I emailed him, didn't hear back for like a 2 weeks, and emailed him again, and then they were like, we don't have anything open at the moment. We'll forward your name to our executive producers. And then I had a couple interviews, and then the rest is that. They hired me after that, and I've been here for 3 years now.
Awesome.
So it's kind of a crazy.
No, that's awesome.
Crazy trip.
Yeah, that's awesome. I get memories. Do you ever get memories on your, whether it be Instagram or any social media during the pandemic? And I think because we hit 4 years, a couple months ago. And it doesn't feel like it's been 4 years, because that was definitely, I think, for a lot of people, some of the toughest times.
Oh yeah, for sure. I get like, I'll see screen grabs and things like that from 4 years ago, and I'm like, man, it just feels like that happened yesterday. Like, it's crazy. Right. Super surreal. And I want to go back to the DA for a little bit, because you were a managing editor there. You had I'm sure you had a lot of fun memories. A lot of us always talk about the fun memories we had at the DA.
Yeah.
What was your sort of favorite moment that you always remember?
Oh man. Is it the DA there? Honestly, I think, it's crazy, because obviously there were a lot of us were going through some of the same classes, and, but I think if you were part of the Daily Aztec, if you're part of your college newspaper, I think that's a whole different experience, because you're all learning together, and you also see just how important journalism is to young students. And I think that's where I got a really good sense of it. And I think that's also what drove me to stay in journalism at the time, was because I realized how many of us were so passionate about journalism. And I think that community was so important. There were nights, I'm sure because we were publishing a paper once a week. I can't remember what day of the week, maybe it was Mondays or Tuesday nights, where you had to make sure everything looked good. All the designs were there. You had to be reading through every sentence 1, 2, 3 times again, making sure there weren't any typos, hopefully. And you had to get it in. I want to say, I can't remember. It was late at night. And so there were days where I remember we would be there till like midnight. And so I'll never forget some of those memories because, especially when you are in your senior year and you're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to be doing after college? You're all in similar situations. You're all in similar scenarios. And so I think those conversations in the newsrooms were so valuable. Like what's crazy too is I still talk to so many people from the Daily Aztec. They are still some of my greatest friends. And so, those are relationships that I'm very, very, very grateful for. And what's so interesting now is that you can go back now and you can talk to people now and you're like, what have the last few years looked like for you? And you can kind of go through the industry with them too, because they're facing some of the same challenges as you. They're facing some of the same experiences and being able, having had the opportunity to build those relationships in college to now still have those relationships and still being able to have those conversations, that's so, so valuable. But were you able to, were you in the newsroom sometimes where you had to submit that paper?
Yeah. I think at least when I was in there, I was not an editor, but I was just hanging around. I would always love hanging around because I just love to talk to people like Bella and Caitlin and Michael Klein and Aaron, like all of them. I'd love to talk to all of them. So I was just always around them. And so it's funny because like I'd just be there late at night. Like you said, we'd be there till midnight and then we'd go to hit up Trujillo's at like 2 or 3 in the morning.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And, just there's a lot of like fun memories, at least for me. Like my favorite one was like I got to cover Dance Marathon with Amal Eunice. I don't know if you know her, but I worked with them all for a little bit. Yeah. So
but the Dance Marathon, which one was that?
That was like where they, those groups would be dancing for like a full 24 hours to donate to the Radies kids or something.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I remember that. Yes.
And I remember we were there because we specifically wanted to, I think I was doing a story about like black fraternities, like they're dancing or things like that, stepping. And they had a performance, but the performance wasn't until 3 a.m. And I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? Because I didn't want to drive home. So I remember like I think there was one night where I just like slept in the newsroom like by myself for like 3-4 hours or something like that. Like,
right.
So that's always one of my favorite stories is like, just those moments where you get to be able to be around, like you said, people that you're passionate with or passionate about the same craft. And you get put in all these different circumstances, which I just always really like about it. And I'm sure you probably share the same sentiment.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned, I know the pandemic hit right before March Madness, but did you get to go to the Mountain West tournament?
I did. I didn't cover it because Aaron and Kyle Betts, they covered it, but but I was with them. Like all of us were there, like Luis Lopez, all of us, we all were made the trek up there. So, but it's crazy because that tournament happened, I think 2 weeks before that whole stuff went down. So it was kind of crazy because we were just all having fun and, people were talking about how serious this whole pandemic was and the case things. And we were like, we don't think it's that serious. And
I don't think anybody thought that it would last as long as it did. As far as, staying home and I don't think anybody had any idea of that. Or most people didn't. Yeah.
I had no idea about it at all. For sure. Certainly. No doubt about it. With your work at the
Mountain West conference was fun because I went the year before. That was fun. That's a good experience.
That's always one of my favorites. With the DA and right in that opportunity, right, with working in student newspapers, networking with people, internships, all these other things that go on at school and then you're just early on in while you were in college. Do you feel like that really helped you to get where you are now? And if so, how did that happen?
I think the Daily Aztec helped a ton. I think you get to cover really, really good stories in college. You get to get a sense of how things work as well. And you get a good sense of how important collaboration is. And so that definitely helped. I think also I applied quite a few times to be an intern at Telemundo San Diego before I actually got the internship. And I don't remember how many times, but maybe like 2 or 4 times maybe before I got the internship my senior year. And that internship really, truly, I think, made a huge impact in my career. I met some great reporters who also guided me. They helped me create my reel. They guided me as far as what markets I should be looking at out of college. And so that was so, so important. And so I think the internships are extremely, extremely important in college. And also just talking to people, because I had gone to the conferences as well. I went the summer after junior year of college. I started going to the NAHJ conference. And you really get to talk to people there, and you even get to get feedback on your reel. And that was extremely, extremely helpful. And being able to build those connections and build those relationships, I think, is extremely, extremely important. So, and I was an intern there for maybe about a year. And there are still times where I hit up some reporters who helped me there. And I was like, hey, do you want to take a look at my reel? I'm looking to apply to these places, and they still will do it. Or when I was leaving Fresno and coming to the Bay Area, I was like, hey, can you look at my reel? Or do you think this would be a good idea? And they're still there, and they're still helping me. And so building those relationships, even in college, is so, so important. But the Daily Aztec, even the Daily Aztec, again, like having that community was so important. And I still think that whether you were writing stories, whether you were part of the broadcast program within the Daily Aztec, that is extremely, extremely important too. And those help build some of my skills that I'm still using. So yeah, every time somebody's, asks if they're in college and they're asking about journalism, I'm like, join your college newspaper. At least for me, it was such a great experience.
Yeah, I'm always saying the same thing, because at least for me, like just having that, having those memories, having that moment, and being able to expose yourself to these different environments and opportunities, whether that's on camera or writing papers or doing stand-ups, everything, all that stuff. Obviously, it's critical. It's huge. It's super important. And for you, like, when you went to Fresno in your first market, and now going to where you are now in the Bay Area, do you feel like, what do you think will help aspiring reporters be able to kind of grow their skills and kind of I don't want to say get a name, but it's almost like kind of expose yourself to being able to get those opportunities in bigger markets?
Yeah. What's so interesting, and I try to always remember this whenever I'm looking at any opportunity. I had spent 2 years in Fresno, and obviously coming home was such a big goal of mine. But I was also looking at Sacramento, and I was thinking, okay, where can I apply? Because a lot of people told me you need another market before you get to the Bay Area. And I was doing one of the conferences, one of the NHJ conferences. And at the time, because of the pandemic, it was virtual. And so I remember I entered a random chat, and I was like, somebody popped in. It was an anchor. He was an anchor at at one of the stations, and he goes, like, where do you want to go next? And I was like, the Bay Area is like my goal, but I know, people are telling me I have to go to another market. And he was like, just apply, just apply, just do it. Just reach out and just do it. Just apply. The worst somebody's going to say is no. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply. And so I did. And then within a week, I had gotten a call back. And I saw that same anchor the next year at the conference. And I don't know if you remembered me or not, but I just went up to him and I was like, thank you. Because you just told me to apply. And because you did, I got a call back, and I got the job eventually. And so it was, I'll never forget that conversation. And sometimes you never know when you're I always tell people, when you're thinking of going to conferences, you may not always get a job from that conference, or you may not make the connection you were hoping to make, but some of those conversations are so vital sometimes. And just him being like, apply, that was encouraging enough for me to actually apply, and then ending up getting the job. I think also some of the things that I was doing throughout even the time that I was in Fresno was just talking to random sometimes I would try to reach out, whether to be to reporters, be like, hey, what's your experience like there? Because I wanted to know. Or it's not a bad idea sometimes to reach out to the news director at a certain station and be like, hey, this is some of my work. You may not have a job opening now, but what do you think? What do you think I can improve on? And then they'll remember you. And then when you're able to send them a reel a couple months later or a year later, they're like, wow, they improved, or they applied some of the advice that I had for them. And that was some of the best advice I got sometimes. But I think also just don't be scared to sometimes people tell you, oh, you need to go to this place first, or maybe you're not ready for this place. Just apply sometimes. And I think that was one of the best decisions I made.
Yeah, I totally can agree on that part. I mean, I feel like at least, and the same goes for producers too. Like when you connect with people and you connect with people that are in higher positions, whether that's news directors or ex-producers turn EPs, whatever, like that will allow you to really be able to kind of expose yourself to bigger names and ultimately bigger markets. At least it's what I've noticed when I've gotten to get in touch with other news directors, like you said, and just telling them about like my own personal experience and things like that. I can understand and imagine like that's pretty critical to kind of just building your overall idea of contacts and things like that, right?
Yeah, no, of course. And I think sometimes it can be nerve-wracking to do because you are, whether it be at a conference, whether it be over email, it can be a little bit anxious sometimes to do that, but I think it is very, very important. There were times where I remember being at the conference and I'd be with somebody and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I really want to talk to this person. Like but I'm nervous. Like I don't want to go up to them. Like just do it. Like it'll be fine. And so some of those conversations, like I mentioned, have been some of the most important ones for me. And I started going to, I think the first conference I went to, I must have been like 16, 17. No, just kidding. Whoa, no, just kidding. I was maybe like 19, 20. I was 19, 20 when I went to my first NHJ conference. And it was, there's some of the best conferences. You get to meet great people. You get to reach out to people. You get to show people your reels. You get to get really good advice from people. And so I think that be you doing it at a conference, you're reaching out to someone there, or whether it be through email, I think that's really important because you are able to build those relationships. And again, they may not have a job for you now, but in the future they could, and they could remember you because like, oh, they reached out to me, or hey, they applied the tips and advice that I gave them. And so, yeah, I think that doing that from early on is important. And I think that also helped me in the long run too.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, with your time in Fresno and that starter market and being there, like I always ask people this that hop on my show, but, you know, athletes always have the welcome to the pros moment. I always say for journalists, there's a welcome to journalism moment. Did you have any particular moments in mind as far as like what really introduced you to like, oh, this is the professional side of the field?
Oh man. That's, you know, I don't know if I have like one specific moment that I can pinpoint. I will say, I think that when you get into the industry, whether, you know, you're a reporter, producer, there are stories that will really, really stick with you. Some stories that you're covering. And I've had a few of them, I've had a lot of them, whether it be in Fresno or here in the Bay Area. So I'm trying to think if there's a story in Fresno that because there were so many that really stuck with me. Man, but I'm trying to, I feel like such a bad guess because I don't have like one moment. I'm trying, I've seen your podcast. I'm trying to think like, what was Kyle Betts's? Did you talk to him about this?
Oh gosh, I think his was like, oh man, I'm trying to remember, but because I think he was in grad school when I had him on the show. Okay, he might have said something. What have people said? Is there like, oh, I know Luis said that he covered like a dust storm in Yuma or something like that, and that was like his real his real welcome to the pros moment. I forget what Aaron Tolentino said to me, but I'm sure he probably had something.
Dang.
But yeah, I mean,
you're like such a bad guest. I can't think of one. Like welcome to, I think it's hard too, because I came in here and it was the pandemic almost immediately hit. But man, I can't think of like one specific moment. I will say I learned very early on that this is not an easy profession. It's not at all. But if you're truly passionate about it, if you're you have to love it and you have to have a lot of passion for it, because some of the stories you're going to be covering they're very difficult sometimes. And I think some of the situations that you're going to be in, I think in Fresno, the pandemic was really hard sometimes because you were talking to families who were going through some of the worst situations during the pandemic. And I think that was really hard as well. And whatever story you're covering, I think you realize just how important your role is in journalism. I think you realize how important it is to tell these stories, and how significant it can be to tell that story really, really well. And I think that's a big responsibility. And I think I really realized that as soon as I joined the industry. But as far as like one moment, I can't think of it. But I think I realized really on just how important it is to love your job here.
Yeah. At least for me, like the moment that I always share with people is like when I think it was a year after I was hired at NBC, or maybe it might have been less than a year, but basically there was a plane crash that happened in Santee where this man was flying from Yuma, and he was flying from Yuma, and I guess he experienced a medical emergency while he was in the air, crashed into a neighborhood in Santee, killed a UPS driver, a dog, and things like that, displaced a family out of their home. And it was like one of the biggest stories that we ended up covering, I think, that year. And what's crazy is like that story actually ended up winning me my first Emmy like ever. So that was really cool. And what I always tell people is crazy about that is like that day I actually was not supposed to work. I got called in because somebody called out sick, and that ultimately led to an Emmy. But I always say like that story for me was my real welcome to the journalism moment, because that really kind of exposed me to like the true breaking news format. Like you're just going, people are, over communicating, wall to wall coverage, all that stuff. I mean, it really kind of exposed me to kind of what I guess producers you don't do it on an everyday basis, but it's one of the things that you always have to anticipate and be prepared for, because it can happen at any day of the moment. And then I think as a reporter, you can probably say the same thing too. I think there was a time where I was in Fresno where we had one of the worst wildfires. It was, at the time, it was one of the worst single wildfires that there had been in California. And when it happened, it was all hands on. We were working from when we woke up to when we fell asleep. And so that obviously that's not something that you experience always in college. And I think that being in my first market, that was something where I realized just how important it is to be telling those stories, because when you are doing that wall to wall coverage, people are watching you, people are going to you sometimes to get some of the latest news, especially when it is an event, something that is affecting a lot of people. So that is, for when I think about events, that is one that I think about all the time, because of that wall-to-wall coverage, but also some of the people you were meeting. They were some of the greatest, I want to say just those conversations can be so significant. The people that you're meeting, some of the greatest people you've met. There are stories of resilience. There are stories just of some things that they've experienced, and the ability to tell those stories. Like I mentioned, you just get a really good idea, a good understanding of just the responsibility you have as a reporter, or the role that you do have in the industry. Yeah. And I think like, at least for me, I didn't recognize the impact that news really has on people until after you see these sorts of things happen. And then you see all these stories of community members rallying together, or like the stories of the people impacted and the victims and things like that. And at least for me, like that really made me realize the amount of work that we do as a journalist that's the result of that. You know, you see the people and they see all the impact and things like that. And it really has a feel on people. And I'm sure you probably feel the same sort of way, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, even here in the Bay Area, some of the stories that I've been able to cover, some of the ones that are my favorite have been the ones that, you hope that it has a big impact on, and the ones that you're able to really, like, some of my favorite stories have been the ones where I'm able to spend time, maybe more than a day, with somebody who I'm going to be telling the story about. If I'm able to spend a good, day with them, or sometimes more than one day, and get a good understanding of what their experience has been like, and then have the ability to tell their story, that is one of the best experiences for me as a journalist, because you hope that it has a really big impact for people. And being able to tell that story really well. I always say, the art of storytelling is it's something that you will always keep growing in. You'll always keep learning. For me, if I'm not learning anymore, if I'm not growing when it comes to my storytelling, why am I still doing this? For me, because I want to be able to grow in the art of storytelling. The way that you're telling stories is so important, because it has an impact on people. And if you care about the story, if you're invested in it, you can create some of the best stories. And your hope, I think, always as a journalist is that it has a lasting impact.
No doubt about it. And as far as that storytelling process, right, I know for each reporter that kind of differs based on the story, or differs based on how they kind of approach it. How do you sort of go about that storytelling writing process? Does that kind of differ from story to story, or is it something that's more linear that you kind of apply it to the same thing every time? Like, how do you really go about it?
Yeah, no, I don't try to always, I think, use the same process, because I think every story is different. It depends, because obviously you have the days where you are doing day turns. So essentially you get your story that day and you have to finish it by the end of the day. So sometimes you don't always have the time to make it, the best that it can be, but you try your best. And so that could be, a task in of itself. That is sometimes very, very challenging when you have a story, you get a story that morning and you have to finish it by the end of the day. And so it really depends on what story it is. But you get the story, you make some phone calls, I'm sure, like, and then hopefully somebody answers. Hopefully somebody gives you an interview. You do the interviews, and then you start doing the writing. But I think the way that you write something, or the process that you use to write something, I think it also depends on the story you're covering.
Yeah, for sure. What was like your best piece of writing advice that you got when you first got into it?
The writing part of it. The best piece of advice. I read my scripts probably, if I have the ability and I have the time to, I write my scripts like 3 to 4 times before I send it to my executive producer to be approved, because I think something that I was always told, and I think a lot of us were told, is that when you are reading this, you're telling the story, you're listening to it as a viewer. Does it make sense? Like, does it make sense? Is this the way that you would talk to somebody, as if you're having a conversation? And so I think about it as, okay, if I'm done with my shift, say I'm done with my shift, I'm done telling my story, and I get home, or I'm having a conversation with a friend and I'm telling them about the story I covered, how would I tell it to them? And how can I kind of incorporate that into my script? Because you also want to make it sound like a conversation with somebody. And I think that is something that I still try to work on every day. And so I think a lot of people hear that, but that truly is one of the best advice that I got, is write as if you're almost talking to somebody, having a conversation with somebody about that story. That helped improve a lot of my writing, but I'm still working on it. And like I said, the art of storytelling, I want to be able to improve, and I want to be able to get better at it.
Yeah, I always, at least with the advice that I always kind of took to heart was like, always be able to read your things out loud. Like sometimes, you know, you may write it and think like, oh, it doesn't sound, you know, it sounds good. But then when you read it out loud or read it to someone else, like then you kind of like get a second input. And that's one of the things that I always kind of make sure. I always remind myself to do that, because sometimes I forget it when I'm producing a show or things like that. Is always to read what you write out loud, because then you can kind of catch your own mistakes that you make.
Right. Yeah, no, I try to read my scripts all the time. It's funny because sometimes I'll have a photographer we're working with in the car, and I'm like reading my scripts. And I'm like, I'm sorry, let me I was like, I'm going to read this out loud 2 or 3 times before I send it. And I try to do that. So no, I think that's extremely important.
How important is that relationship between a reporter and a photog? Because I can imagine, like, obviously you guys are so codependent on each other, right? They need to put your piece together. You need to make your script and tell the story. How important is establishing a good rapport and a good relationship between a reporter and a photographer?
It's so important. It's so important, because you spend a lot of time of your day with this person. I will say during when I was working mornings, I was working, because I've in the Bay Area, I've been at 2 stations. So at my first station, I was working mornings, and I was with a photographer. And the first week I was like, oh, you know, we have very different personalities. And so he was like, just give us a few, you know, he was very transparent. He said, give us a few weeks. You're going to understand some of my like hand signals, because in the morning you're going live so many times that morning, and sometimes you're having to move, you're having to walk. And so that communication with your photographer is so important. And it got to the point, we had worked together for quite a bit at this time, and it got to the point where he would just make one hand movement and I knew exactly what he was talking about. Hey, there's something going on behind you here. You should look at it. And he had certain hand movements. I knew where he was going, and, you know, a couple months and our communication was so good. And so I think that relationship is so good, or so important to have with your photographer, whether it is you're doing live shots together, and also when it comes to the storytelling part of it, because I think you have to have that relationship with when you're comfortable enough to tell him, hey, you know what, is there any way where we can maybe switch these shots up? Or I think this shot would look better with, you know, this track. And I think he's also comfortable enough to be like, hey, maybe you want to retract this. This sounded a little bit, I think you said this word wrong. And so there have been times where the photographer will be like, hey, I think you said this it's the other way around. And I'm like, wait, does it sound better that way? And I'm like, no, you're right. And I think being comfortable enough to have those conversations with your photographer is really important.
And about that idea of getting comfortable with, you know, with photogs, like, you know, what do you do to get comfortable doing live shots? Because I can imagine like trying to get adjusted to that right away is very, very tough. I mean, I know Luis Lopez kind of said his sort of approach about it too. Like everybody kind of has their own sort of way about going about it. How do you go about it?
So when I was starting off, even before I got into my first reporting job, somebody always told me when I was creating my reels, look at yourself in the mirror and just start practicing. And so I was like, and I started to do it, and it actually was very, very helpful. Something I tell people when they're doing their live shots, because this has really been some of my best live shots, is you just need to know what you're talking about. Because if you have something on your phone where you're like, I have something on my phone, and you are, okay, I need to memorize this. I need to memorize word by word. Okay, cool. Now you're thinking about it. Now you're really thinking about, oh my gosh, I forgot what that word is. Oh, I forgot exactly what I was supposed to say. Now you're messing with yourself. Now you're messing with your head. If you know what you're talking about, because you remember you worked all day on this story, or you know this story because you've been working on it. It's here. Have a conversation with somebody about it. That's what I try to tell people when it comes to just what I did to improve my live shots. I know what I'm talking about. I've been working on this story. Now I just got to tell it to somebody. And so when I'm, you know, looking at the camera, I try to block off, okay, what did my script say? No, hold on. What do I want to get across? What is important about this story? What do I want viewers to, like, what should viewers know about this story? Because at the end of the day, you know it. I think you really start to mess with your head when you're like, okay, I need to memorize this. But as far as like starting off, I was looking at myself in the mirror a lot and trying to figure out, I was like, okay, this sound better, this sound better. And then when you're creating your reel, you really get to look at yourself and be like, I didn't like what I was doing here, or this sounded a bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any favorite live shots that you've done in your news career so far?
Ooh, favorite live shots. So I'm a big Giants fan. I'm a big sports fan, like Bay Area sports fans when it comes to the Giants, Warriors, Niners. And so one day they were like, Jocelyn, you're going to cover the opening day. And I was like, what do you mean I'm covering opening day, like for the Giants? And it was like, this was a couple years ago. And so I was like, no way, what? And so I was doing morning live shots from the field. And it was like the most surreal moment for me, because I was like, this is crazy to me. Like, I'm on the field talking about the Giants. What? And so I think those were always some of the best live shots for me, because just being able to talk about, opening day, or whether it be the playoffs for the Warriors, or whether it be talking to fans, those are some of the best live shots for me. There have also been quite a few live shots where I've messed up, and that's okay. I don't think a lot of reporters have stories of them not messing up ever in their live shot. I think it's normal. We're human. And so I also have quite a few live shots that I messed up pretty bad.
And, that's one of the things I always like to tell people is like, it's okay to be human. Like, people mess up. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. Like, I say that a lot because that I think people have a hard time adjusting to, is like, you can really get hard on yourself. It's very easy to get hard on yourself in this field. But, every mistake that you make, the biggest thing is just to be able to move on and learn from it and adapt to the next thing. Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. There was somebody gave me this piece of advice when I was in college and I was an intern. They said, try not to take things personally, because you can be in very high stress situations sometimes in this job with the deadlines. And so sometimes you may get some attitude from somebody because they are in a high stress situation, or you may give attitude to somebody because you are in a high stress situation. Being able to go back at the end of the day, be like, I'm sorry, that was high stress situation. I apologize, whatever. If it was a certain way you talked to somebody, or maybe it was like you gave somebody a bit of attitude, you always try not to, but you also understand that there are people in high stress situations. Somebody told me, don't take things personally, because guess what? The next day you're going to be on a different story. It's going to be a whole other day, and everybody's going to have forgotten about it. And so, that was something that was a piece of advice I got when I was in college, and I try to remember that. But I think, as far as like moving on for the next days, sometimes you do mess up. Like my live shot, I remember there was one time where I messed up really badly on my live shot in Fresno, and it kept me up at night. That night I could not sleep. I was like, oh my gosh, I messed up so badly. And I was like, I couldn't sleep. And I think after that, I was like, you know what? We're human. We are human, and we are going to mess up. And there are going to be some days where it's not the best days. You're not going to have the best days. And then being able to be like, okay, tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow I have a new opportunity to tell a story to the best of my ability. I think that's extremely important. But I think, like you said, also understanding that we are human and that we are going to make mistakes, and that we also are going to have situations where we are going to be in some very high stress situations, and understanding that, okay, that was that day. The next day, it's a new day. That's important.
Oh yeah, for sure. No doubt about it. And just before we close things out here, like, as far as, you as a reporter, right, you've been through small market, big market. Did it take you a while to really feel comfortable in who you are and how you approach things as a reporter? Or do you feel like you kind of always had that confidence right out of college?
No, I don't think I had that confidence at all out of college. I think that I came out of college and I was like, there's a lot that I have to learn. And I think that you go through that throughout the industry. You're always learning. And it takes time to build up that confidence, because you're going to make mistakes at first. You try your hardest not to, but you're going to make mistakes. And so I think confidence comes with experience, and that's happened with me. And I feel like I built my confidence with the experience that I had. The more experience that I had, the more years under my belt in the business that I had, the more confident I felt, whether that be in my live shots, whether that be in my writing, whether that be just going up to people and asking people for an interview, or even just during the interviews and that the asking questions portion of it. I think that confidence is built with your experience. But I think the timing in your life is also just, I think everybody has their own timing too. Understanding that where you are is where you're meant to be at that moment. And that was something that I always thought about was, okay, I want to get to the Bay Area at some point. How do I do it? And I was always stressing about it. And looking back, I'm like, okay, this is where I was needed at that point. This is where I was meant to be at that point. And I think also understanding that everybody has their own timing as well. And so, but as far as the confidence portion, yeah, I think it takes time to build. And the more experience you have and the more you learn from your mistakes, the more that confidence is built.
I always say
I feel like I ramble a lot.
Oh yeah, no, I always say the same thing. I say the same thing for producers too, because it's like, when you may start out doing a show and it might not go well, but the more shows that you get down and get through, and the more that you develop that relationship with reporters through live shots, giving them cues, things like that, through weather people, like that, all that stuff is important, because the better relationships that you have with your writers, your editors, your EPs, your anchors, your reporters. I mean, like I always say, everything's kind of codependent on each other. I always feel like that's the reality in journalism in general. Like everybody's kind of codependent on each other. And so if you don't have a good relationship with anybody, like it's not going to go well all the time, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. And I, even with producers, I've some of the best relationships I've built, some of the greatest friends I have now are my producers, because I love it when especially in the mornings, because you are doing so many live shots. If your producer's talking to you in your ear, I'm like, okay, I'm good. Sometimes they're just like, hey, just letting you know, I'm going to you after this. I'm looking for a hit of like a minute, 2 minutes. And then like that conversation, that communication, even though you're only listening to them, is so key and so important. And so I love it when producers are talking to me in my ears. And I know producers have a lot on their plates, and sometimes it's not possible. And I think also having those conversations too with producers is important, because there have been times where we're like, hey, I didn't hear you. Like, I didn't know this, and this. And they're like, look, I have so many things going on. Sometimes I didn't have the opportunity to remind you about something. And so I think even after a show, if you're having a conversation with your producer being like, hey, okay, this went wrong, or this could have gone better. What can we do better for the next time or for the next show? I think that's extremely, extremely important. But you're right. I think that collaboration with whoever it is in the newsroom, the different roles that you have, those roles, having that collaboration, those conversations is very significant.
Yeah, collaboration is a key to success. What's your piece of advice for aspiring journalists and how they can be successful in the field?
I think you really have to love it. You have to love it, because it's not an easy job. It's not by any means. There are days where that are going to be harder than others. And you have to really, really love it. And I think you also have to remind yourself of why you did it in the first place. Why you decided to pursue this career in the first place. I think that's something I try to do even today, is like, okay, why did you decide to pursue this career? You love telling stories. You love storytelling. You love being able to talk to people. You love knowing that hopefully the stories that you're telling has an impact. So the first thing is you have to be passionate. You have to love it. And I think when you're coming out of college, also understanding that you're going to learn a lot, and you have to be open to learning and also taking advice from people. And then also just reaching out to people, whether, if there is a market where you want to end up at, if there is a place where you want to end up at, there's a city, start reaching out to news directors even now and being like, look, this is what I've been able to do the last few months at my first market. Do you have any advice for me? One, that advice is really important. Two, they're also going to remember you. And especially if you apply that advice to your live shots, to your storytelling, and then you send them those stories later on in a few months, be like, hey, look, I've done these stories now. What do you think? And they see that you're applying that. Some of the advice that they gave you, that's extremely, I think they're going to remember you. And so I think it's the reaching out to people. It's also setting goals for yourself. It's also understanding that everybody's on their own timing. And then also understanding that you have to love this job.
I think it's well said. For me, I always say, like, my favorite thing to say is don't be afraid to take risks, and then never stop learning, because you never, with this field, you always learn more about yourself. You learn more about where you want to go in your career. You learn more about your goals, your jobs, your direction, and all these doors you can open for yourself. If you just keep learning. And I think that's and that goes back to what you said, right? Never lose sight of your passion, never lose sight of your goals, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I think that was beautifully said.
Okay. So. Now I know I ramble a lot, so I apologize if this went longer than you wanted it to. So
it was totally fine. It's actually this is not the longest episode I've done, so that's totally fine.
Really?
Yeah.
This is like the second longest episode.
I haven't. I mean, I have done too many now to count. I
ramble a lot. I apologize.
I have done too many to count. Listeners, you can follow Jocelyn on Twitter at Jocelyn Moran. Catch her on NBC Bay Area Wednesday through Sunday. Is that correct?
No, I'm Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday night side. You can catch her on NBC Bay Area News. Jocelyn, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And it's always nice to have conversations from some former SDSU alumni, Daily Aztec alumni. Right?